another game. Yes, it is fantastic. They just beat the Seahawks, but we're not here to talk about football. However, if you guys are interested in American football, then I recommend tuning into a lot of the other podcasts that we have as a show. We have a football podcast, happens directly before my basketball podcast. There's also a sports podcast, which does every single sport, so not just football. However, since football is in season, that's obviously going to be like the main talking point in a lot of those segments, especially when the week starts and when Monday starts, because they all do this recap of all the games that previously went down and as well predict what's going to happen in the Monday night game. So I highly recommend tuning into those podcasts. There's also a chip shot football podcast, a fantasy football podcast. We have so much stuff that is about football, and I highly recommend tuning into that, because that way you can hear the recap of what the Giants did on Sunday, as well as it maybe NFL football isn't your thing and you're more of a college fan. We also have a college football podcast that you can go ahead and watch and listen to, and I highly recommend tuning into those. But you guys wanted to talk about basketball. You guys wanted to hear about basketball. So for the first segment, actually, let me stop wearing this hat. Okay, there we go. So for the first segment, hold on, let me just grab the comb. We are going to be talking about the WNBA and the playoff games that recently happened over the weekend, because I'm sure nobody even paid attention to that, because guess what? Football happens over the weekend, so it makes total sense that no one really pays attention to these WNBA games, and viewership has dropped dramatically, I will say. And then in the second segment, I'm going to talk about LeBron and Bronny finally playing an actual NBA game together. It doesn't matter that it's preseason, they still shared the court, and that's important to note. And then in the third segment, we are going to talk about my predictions that I did over on Friday, and just, give a recap of what happened and how I was wrong. And we'll talk about that. And then in the fourth segment, we are going to talk about some former NBA players that ended up getting scammed, which is you don't really hear this happen often, which is why I decided to just do that as the fourth segment, because it's something that you'd never really hear about. So, and I'm kind of interested exactly how they got scammed, and just talking about it as well. We also have a special fifth segment that I reveal at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Before I begin, however, I do like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show. Whether you guys have a hot take, a burning question, something you've just been dying to share, we are all a question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and then you can send in your comments and or donations that way. It really helps the show. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, then that's totally fine. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or, it really helps the show and makes it much more interactive. So with that out of the way, let's go right ahead and let me open up these slides real quick so that way we can talk about the recent WNBA games. Now, surprise, surprise, since Caitlin Clark has been eliminated from the WNBA postseason, the WNBA viewership is going down. I wonder why. Maybe it's because you decide to have your games on football night, which makes no sense. It genuinely makes no sense. I'm going to continue saying this every single time that I do this WNBA segments, because it's not only is it just bad planning, it's also unfair for a lot of these WNBA athletes, because they're already mad at Caitlin for hogging the spotlight, and now what are they going to do about football? Like, it's really just it's a bad situation for all of them. Now, on Friday, these games went down, which is a little bit of more of a respectable day for these games to go down. The Minnesota Lynx ended up winning in Game 3 to make the series 2-1. However, that does not really matter towards the end, because the Connecticut Sun ended up tying the series back up in Game 4 over Sunday and is now in prime contention. Well, not really in prime contention, but now they're going to play a Game 5 in Minnesota. So, and this is going to close out the series. This is the most competitive series that that the WNBA is having right now, and arguably this is literally the only series that has not ended with the better team beating the worst team. So anything can really happen, and by that I mean like all the previous playoff games and all the previous rounds that have happened before this matchup between the Lynx and the Sun, they were all like very predictable. The top-heavy teams were going to end up coming out on top. And on the other side, however, the Liberty ended up closing out the Aces in Game 4. They ended up losing on Friday, which was a little bit surprising because, again, I thought they were going to end up just closing out the game in 3 and sweeping them, but that didn't happen. The Aces, they ended up showing that they still had more fight in them. They ended the game with 95 total points, and the Liberty in the third quarter of that game 3 only had 6 points. Yes, that third quarter was the collapse, and that 6-point performance was awful from the Liberty. And of course, since they had to play catch up afterwards, and they couldn't really afford to. Like that third quarter killed them and was the reason why they could not end up coming out on top. And obviously those issues were quickly amended once they ended up playing in Game 4, as the Liberty sort of turned it around on them, and it was the fourth quarter where the Aces started to struggle. They only put up 11 points in the fourth quarter. Meanwhile, the Liberty ended up putting up 23 points. And to put this in perspective, in 2 quarters, the Aces were only able to put up 24 points, meaning that in one fourth quarter performance from the Liberty, they were just 1 point worse than the Aces were in 2 quarters, meaning the entire second half. So that Liberty team ended up closing them out with 0 problems whatsoever in the final game. And so now in Game 4, and now the only real competitive series that we have left is Connecticut against Minnesota. And this game is going to take place tomorrow at 8 o'clock on ESPN2. So for any of you guys that are interested in that, I recommend tuning in. Now, let's talk about like the actual leaders of the game themselves. We'll go ahead and we'll talk about Game 3 first for each respective series. So this was the game that the Lynx ended up winning. And the Connecticut Sun, they really, for a team that had home court advantage, they really did not take advantage of it. I did not mean to sound redundant there, but seriously, they did not take advantage at all. And Nafisa Collier, yes, Andre in the chat mentioned Nafisa against Stewie, Nafisa versus Stewie, and yes, it was a very, very solid game that the two of them played. And honestly, I mean, how should I say this? The performance from Minnesota was really like, Nafisa was fantastic in this game. Ended with 26 points and 11 rebounds. And let's see, that was really like the highlight performance of this game when you look at both teams. And I mean, there was also Brianna Jones, again, forgive me if I mess up that last name, going up against Nafisa, and she ended the game with 21 points, but again, still just wasn't enough for the Lynx. And they really messed up their home court advantage because they really could have closed the series out right here and now, but now they're forced to play an away game in Minnesota, and depending on how the home crowd is going to be over there, I have no idea. I mean, they could be in for it. They could be in for a lot of trouble. They did, however, beat them in Minnesota before, so there's a very good chance that they end up winning. But again, I don't really think that whoever ends up coming out on top is going to beat the Liberty, who already came out on top. But we'll see, because obviously, things happen. And anything can happen with these kinds of teams. Now, Collier in Game 4, once again, had the performance of her life. 29 points and 13 rebounds. Literally the only positive thing on the offensive side of the ball for Minnesota in this game, despite Natisha... my English is bad. Aside from Natisha, And Natisha in this game ended up scoring 16 points in 23 minutes, but everybody else on the court was just really, really bad. Like, they all played really, really bad. And let's just go ahead and look at the box scores real quick. Bridget Carlton, forgive me if I messed up that last name, she ended the game with only shooting 2 for 11 from 3, which is awful. And let's see, who else? And then there's also Kayla McBride, who ended the game 2 for 6 from the field. And these kinds of productions, it's not helping the team at all. Now, with the Connecticut Sun, they had more than one player score over 15 points. And that's really sort of the big difference in this matchup compared to, or at least in this game compared to the previous games. Is that multiple people were able to step up for Connecticut when they needed them to. And the Minnesota Lynx, no one was able to step up aside from Nafisa. So we'll see exactly who's going to end up closing this game out in the next game, because now it seems to be like it's going to be anyone's game, since they've proven that they can win away games as well as win at home. And I'm only going to cover game 4 of the Liberty against the Aces because, like, the reality is that, like, this team is just a much better team. Sure, Aja Wilson might be the MVP, but at the end of the day, you can be the MVP and your team is just not all that talented compared to this team, the Liberty. I mean, the Liberty have a very, very talented squad. And obviously, that's with Sabrina and Brenna Stewart. Sabrina ended the game with 22 points. Brenna Stewart actually kind of hindered her team's performance, but it didn't really matter. She shot 8 for 21 for only 19 points. But again, does not really matter because at the end of the day, they ended up winning the series, and a win is a win. You win by a mile or win by an inch. And however, I will say that there were some players that just were abysmal from the field for the Liberty, even though it didn't really matter. Lainey Hamilton, that's her middle and last name, I believe. Again, forgive me if I messed all that up. She was 1 for 7 from the field, which is awful. Then there was also Kennedy Burke, 0 for 4, again, awful. And Kayla Thornton, again, awful, 0 for 3 from the field. But aside from that, Sabrina Ionescu was just enough and provided enough to beat this team, while at the same time the Aces were sort of unable to keep up. And it's really that second half where they were down, where they were in a ditch. It's really that second half that hindered them. Because, I mean, 13 points in one quarter, 11 points in the other quarter, it's not ideal. But that's all that I have to say about these WNBA games. So now we will go ahead and go into the next segment, which is going to be about LeBron James and the one and only offspring himself, Bronny James Jr. So we are going to go ahead and talk about their first game ever played with together. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we are going to be talking about LeBron James and his son, Bronny James, and how they played in their first ever NBA game, preseason game still counts as an NBA game. They played their first NBA game together yesterday. So before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you guys have a hot take, whether you guys have a burning question, or something you've been dying to share. We are all ears. If you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box and you can send in your comments and or donations that way, and it'll really help the show. If Super Chat's not really your thing, then that's totally fine. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That's gsmcpodcast.net. And you can send in your comments and or donations that way. And if you do, it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. But let's go right ahead and talk about LeBron and Bronny James. So, obviously, the first ever game that they both played with each other, LeBron literally made his teammate. And this is a lifetime achievement for LeBron. This is something that he's always wanted to do. And this is arguably the best father-son duo in NBA history, and LeBron and Bronny James combined for 19 points. LeBron had 19, and that's all you really need to know. But aside from that, LeBron still 19 points, 16 minutes, proving to everybody that he is just continued to be the best. He is still the top dog in the NBA. He is still the apex predator and is still somebody that is a very solid force in NBA basketball. 19 points in 16 minutes is insane no matter who you are. And he also was able to acquire 5 rebounds and 4 assists as well. And now, with Bronny's side, as you guys know, he helped LeBron James in combining for 19 points, meaning that he ended up scoring 0 points, which is it's really not looking good right now for Bronny and his, his lack of offense. And, this was also a problem in the previous matchup against the Timberwolves. I'm not really going to talk about the matchup as a whole, but I'm going to talk about Bronny and his performance in that overall matchup. And yeah, I was about to say, Bronny doesn't even pop up in the box scores. That's how bad it is. But no, he does. He ended up going 1 for 6 in that previous game against Minnesota. And while his defense was phenomenal, and he did get this chase down block that had the whole media just, because it was like, blocked by James, where have I seen that before kind of vibes. You guys understand what I'm saying? So it's like all of these little things and all of these little plays are getting so much attention. That's a problem, because this is just going to increase the amount of scrutiny that so many people are going to give towards Bronny just because he is LeBron James' son. And it really begs the question, should have Bronny been drafted? Would he have been drafted if he was LeBron James, if he was someone other than LeBron James' son? The answer is no. I genuinely don't think that he would have gotten drafted if he wasn't LeBron's son. However, that doesn't mean that he cannot improve. That does not mean that he cannot get better over the years. That also does not mean that this is going to be the ceiling that we see Bronny. This isn't necessarily Bronny's ceiling. He could get better. And that's going to take time. Because look at Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown was arguably just as bad in the preseason and in the summer league as Bronny is now. And here he's winning finals MVPs, and he's winning Eastern Conference finals MVPs. And it's like, you can really be that guy if you work your way to it. And if you try to, if you put in the work, you can do everything. And the one thing that a lot of people might not have agreed with is the fact that Bronny is going straight to the NBA and not somewhere like maybe the G League or play another year in college. But at the end of the day, I feel like, if you do make it, if there is a chance that you can get in the NBA, then you get in the NBA. So that way you can get that contract, and you can also get the coaching experience from a lot of the modern NBA coaches, and still, like, it's coaching experience, and the coaches are arguably going to be better in the NBA than they are in college, so you're still working on improving yourself. And let me just go ahead and acknowledge somebody in the chat. Trixie, just came across your channel and am enjoying it. Thank you for sharing your sports knowledge. I appreciate it. It's not just my channel. It's like, a channel full of so many other people as well that I also recommend you listen to. We have a football podcast that happens before the basketball podcast that I do. We also have a sports podcast that covers all of the sports, but, mainly it's going to cover football because the football games just happened recently. They literally just happened yesterday, as well as the college football games. I mean, he can cover that as well. And we also have a college football podcast. Also, we have a chip shot football podcast. We have a fantasy football podcast. We have so many football podcasts. It's honestly a little bit too much, but honestly, you can never have too much football. But more so on Bronny. Speaking of football, maybe Bronny would have had a better career pursuing football. Who knows? But aside from that, right now it's like these games, they're not good. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They're not good games coming in from Bronny. But I don't really know what the fans sort of expect him to do. Like, do they expect him to be this good overnight? I genuinely don't understand. Now, obviously, we know that the reason, I don't really want to say it in this sort of way, but nepotism does exist in the NBA, and it is a big reason why Bronny was drafted. However, that does not mean that I'm firmly believing that he can definitely improve on his game, and he has the perfect player to help him do that. I mean, there's probably way more that Bronny can learn from his own father than he could learn from some of these coaches in the NBA. And I feel like his time on the Lakers roster ultimately gives LeBron James more time with his son, who in turn will be able to learn more from him. Because, I mean, obviously, when Bronny and LeBron are in college, they're doing when Bronny is doing his thing and when LeBron is doing his thing, they're in two completely different worlds. And it's only in certain moments where they actually spend time with each other aside from the off season. So imagine now that they spend all this time together 24/7 doing nothing but working on basketball. I think that improvement, I think we should be able to see some sort of improvement as the season progresses from Bronny. I think a really big problem here is that he just cannot make his shots. And because he already has defense down. That is half the battle right there. Defense is half the game. Well, I guess, if you're a good team, a little bit less than half because you spend a few more possessions on offense, right? But half the game, essentially, is played on the other side of the court. And Bronny already knows how to do that. And Bronny can do that rather efficiently. Now it's just the other side of the basketball court that he's going to have to work on. And I think spending time, all the time, with LeBron is one of the best coaching methods that you can possibly have. Again, that is just me, just given off of the fact of LeBron's IQ, the way that he thinks, and the way that he knows the game is played, not just the way that he knows the game. He has 22 years of experience, so Bronny can probably have access to knowledge that no other coach, even JJ Redick might not even be able to have, because let's face it, JJ Redick, well, I have no idea how his coaching career is, but based off of experience in the NBA, LeBron already has more than JJ Redick, despite the fact that JJ Redick is already an NBA coach. So just put that into perspective and put that into some sort of thinking, because again, being able to spend all of your time with the greatest basketball player to ever touch the court, it could really, really help you. It genuinely can help your game. Now, I know it sounds like I'm just being super incredibly optimistic for Bronny, and yes, I definitely am. It's not necessarily because he is LeBron James' son, at least I try for it not to be, but I also do not want to jump the gun on any sort of players based off of preseason or summer league performances. And I also don't want to jump the gun after just 1 year, because we've seen players just, be rather poor in their rookie year, or really bad in a specific year early on, and then they later on develop into the kind of player that they were expected to be, or even better than the kind of player that everyone thought they were expected to be. Like Fred VanVleet, nobody thought that Fred VanVleet was going to be this talented. Now you hear a bunch of people splurting out hot takes about how he's better than John Stockton, which is absurd, by the way. And again, back with the Jaylen Brown, nobody expected Jaylen Brown to be a Finals MVP or an Eastern Conference Finals MVP. Yet here he is. And what other player that wasn't really hyped up in the beginning or didn't really... I mean, you could make the argument that Victor Oladipo was one of those kinds of players. I mean, when he was on Orlando, he was pretty solid, but then when he went to OKC, he wasn't as impressive as a lot of people thought. And then when he went to Indiana, he turns into the Black Panther. Like, these kind of performances and these kind of players, they exist, they happen. It's a huge possibility that it can also happen with Bronny. So I really don't want to jump the gun on those kind of instances. But that's just me. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Now, aside from that, we are going to recap we're going to go into the third segment, and we're going to do a recap of my predictions for the games that were going to happen on opening night, which was the Friday games, Friday, October 4th. And I'm just going to go ahead and recap exactly what happened and what my predictions were. And if there is a little bit of time, then I'll recap some of the other games, but I am trying to save that for a little bit later. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And hold on just one second. Let me just adjust the microphone just a little bit because I accidentally played with it for a few seconds and I shouldn't have. But anyways, now we're going to go ahead and go into a quick recap of my predictions that I made on Friday before these games ended up happening. So I thought the Nuggets and I thought the Lakers were going to end up winning in the preseason opener. Spoilers, they didn't. So I ended up being wrong. Fantastic. This goes to show you guys, if you guys are going to bet on any of these games, always bet on the team that I don't pick. Because for some reason, I always end up being wrong with these kinds of things. And I don't understand why. I genuinely don't understand why. I mean, I can get that I was wrong about the Lakers. I was feeling optimistic. I thought LeBron was going to play. He wasn't going to play, obviously, because it's preseason games. And I should have known better. I genuinely should have just known better. Now, the Nuggets, on the other hand, I'm a little bit surprised that they ended up losing. And the game was very, very weird. I mean, towards the end, I don't even know what just happened. But, like, apparently the people that were operating the scoreboard had the score wrong towards the end. And it enabled the Celtics to propel forward. Again, it was very confusing, and I was so confused towards the end that I can't even tell you what happened. I don't even know how it affected anything because it's just like these kinds of miscues and these kinds of mistakes, they rarely happen. And it shouldn't have happened, quite frankly. But aside from that, it's like I don't know what happened. So I can't really say that this call affected them late, this call affected them early. I genuinely cannot say that because I just don't know what the problem was. Like, it was weird. It was just, obviously, I'm not holding these scoreboard operators to a high, like, oh my gosh, you messed up the score, this is treason, or something like that. Because, I mean, we're all human at the end of the day. We all make mistakes. It's better to make this kind of mistake now in the preseason than in the NBA Finals. Because imagine if this sort of thing happened in the Finals. Oh my Lord, Denver would riot. The entire place would riot, and they would somehow find a way to blame blame the Broncos for this, or somehow, and they would get so mad. Like, this is a good thing that it did not happen early on in the later in the season, and this happened early on, Now, for the Celtics, again, they used a lot of their players in the rotation, and it makes sense, preseason games, it makes sense that you want to utilize all your players and see exactly what everyone's got. Luke Cornett ended the game with 6 points, but he did get 11 rebounds, which is very, very impressive, if I do say so. Jason Tatum ended the game with he did not end the game with the most points, but for the starting lineup, he did. He ended up getting 12 points. But the leading scorer was actually Peyton Picard, I almost forgot his name for some reason. And he ended the game with 21 points and 6 assists, as well as 4 rebounds. And he shot 6 for 12 from 3. Very, very, very impressive. And Tatum, obviously, 4 for 11 from the field, 3 for 7 from 3. It's all right. And I mean, geez, there were so many Celtics players that ended up playing in this game. So many players coming off the bench. I mean, Sam Hauser came off the bench. Xavier Tillman came off the bench. Neemias Quetta came off the bench. J.D. Davidson came off the bench. Drew Peterson came off the bench. Jaden Springer as well. Baylor Shearman. He doesn't even have a profile picture. And Lonnie Walker IV also came off the bench. And Anton Watson, another player that doesn't have a profile picture up there. And let's see, Dmitrio Stepinsev, forgive me if I mess up that last name. Again, he doesn't have a player profile picture either. So many people were in this rotation. And as for the Nuggets, Nikola Jokic, 14 points, 8 rebounds, along with 2 assists. This was also Russell Westbrook's debut for the Denver Nuggets. He ended the game with 12 points, 8 assists, and 4 rebounds, which is pretty solid. However, his shooting was awful, 3 for 10 from the field. These are sort of the performances that I think you should expect from Russell Westbrook. Yes, he's going to fill up the box scores rather well. I mean, filling it up with 12 points, 4 rebounds, and 8 assists is great. However, you are also going to get the shooting woes, which is 3 for 10, which could end up hurting the team more so than it actually helps the team, which is a big problem that he's had for his career, and he still has not changed it. But aside from that, Aaron Gordon, 3 for 10 from the field, absolutely horrible. And Zeke Naji ended up, forgive me if I messed up that last name, ended the game 4 for 7 from the field with 10 points. And similar to the Boston Celtics, they had several players coming in and out of the rotation. They had Jameer Young, another player without a player profile. Peter Hooley, another player without a player profile. Spencer Jones, who has absolutely zero data available for him, which is ridiculous. Also PJ Hall, again, another player with 0 data. And Gabe McLaughlin, another player with 0 data. And it was just your average preseason game. Now, going on to the Lakers game, which I didn't really talk about all that much, they too had a couple of players in the rotation that you definitely did not hear of before, like Armel Traore, forgive me if I mess up that last name, Kyler Kelly, forgive me if I mess up that last name as well, and of course, I mean, the biggest and the most popular rookie on the planet, Bronny James Jr. He ended up going 1 for 6 in this game, which was awful, not going to sugarcoat it at all. And he did end up getting that chase down block that I did mention before. But in the end, the team just did not play nearly as well as Minnesota's team, who had a very, very solid performance coming in from the bench. I mean, Rob Dillingham ended the game with 21 points, and Luca Garza ended the game with 20 points. And let's see, Josh Minot ended the game, forgive me if I mess up that last name, he also ended the game with 22 points. And really, this was just a great game from a lot of these players. And Rob Dillingham also, a player that they ended up trading for in the draft. He shot 9 for 20, but he did end the game with 21 points. So, it was a very, very solid performance coming in from everyone else and on the Timberwolves. Now, obviously, these are just, bench players going up against bench players, so this doesn't really determine anything for the regular season, but it is just, my prediction just ended up being wrong. In fact, the only prediction that I ended up getting right was the Jazz winning their game, but that's only because they ended up playing a team from Europe, New Zealand, I should say. My bad. But, again, it's you can't really... It was unfair. It was a terrible outing for me with these predictions. And I might as well go ahead. You know what? Since we do have a little bit of time, I will go ahead and cover talk about the Saturday game, which was a close game. The Clippers ended up losing, to the Golden State Warriors, unfortunately, and the score was 91-90. Now, Steph Curry did not play all that much, only played 14 minutes, ended the game with 9 points, 2 for 8 from the field. Fantastic shooting from Steph. That is obvious sarcasm. And again, this was just another game where a lot of the bench started playing more minutes than the starting rotations. And preseason, that's sort of what you expect, because you have to sort of, as a coach, you have to see how these players respond to the moment and whether or not you can actually fit them in a rotation. And I mean, the starters, they combined for 30 points. The bench, and since there were so many people coming off the bench, they ended up scoring 61 points. Now, for the Clippers side, James Harden ended the game with 13 points, played 17 minutes, and also recorded 8 assists. And Kawhi Leonard did not play. Yeah, Kawhi Leonard did not seem to play in this game. And, I mean, are you guys surprised that he did not play in this game? He is a load manager for a reason. He is not going to play in these kinds of games. And for the Warriors, the performance, the best player was arguably either between Lindy Waters III, who ended the game with 15 points in 15 minutes, or Moses Moody, who ended the game with 12 points and 4 rebounds. Now, for the Clippers side, Ivica Zubac arguably had the best performance over everybody on the roster, ending the game with 14 points, 6 rebounds, and 1 assist. And that's all that I have to talk about for these recaps of these games, for now at least. So now we will go ahead and go into the fourth segment, where I talk about couple of former NBA players that got scammed out of millions of dollars. So I'm going to go ahead and read it from this article right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned if you are curious to figure out how they got scammed and why they got scammed.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to talk about a couple of former NBA players that got scammed for actually a lot of millions of dollars. Like, it's not just $1 million, it's millions of dollars. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that in this fourth segment. So it is reported that on Friday, a man was convicted of scamming former NBA players Chandler Parson as well as Dwight Howard of a combined $8 million. So he was able to yoink $1 million from Christian Braun and then yoink the other $7 million from Dwight Howard. Now, why did this happen? well, according to this article, quote, a Georgia businessman was convicted Friday on 5 counts by a federal jury in Manhattan of defrauding former NBA players Dwight Howard and Chandler Parsons of a combined $8 million in 2021. ESPN's Brian Windhorst wrote again, quote, Calvin Darden Jr. was found guilty of fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, and 2 different conspiracy counts. This is the quotes. This is not me accusing him of this. This is the quote. If this story was not crazy enough, Windhorst added that Parsons sent money to Darden for what the ex-NBA forward believed was an investment into the development of former Golden State Warriors center James Wiseman, which is a little bit odd, right? I mean, so this guy, not this guy, excuse me. Chandler Parsons was paying someone $1 million to try and develop Warriors center James Wiseman. And according to Legion of Hoops, who ended up tweeted out, Calvin Darden Jr. was convicted of scamming Dwight Howard, Chandler Parsons. Howard was fooled out of his $7 million of what he thought was an investment towards the purchase of a women's basketball franchise. So on one end, you have Christian Braun getting scammed for trying to develop a young player in James Wiseman, and here you have Dwight Howard getting scammed and thinking that he's going to invest in a women's basketball franchise. Whether it's WNBA or whether it's just women's basketball in general, I have no idea, but it doesn't matter. That's money out of his pocket and in someone else's pocket. Excuse me. So more on the report. Parsons was tricked into a fraudulent investment in the development of the career of former number 2 James Wiseman, according to Windhorst, and Warriors fans have been reacting to their... Oh, wait a minute. The article just closed. No, I don't like that. No, go back. Okay. So Warriors fans have been reacting to their 2020 second overall pick being named in this report. And fans are in agreement that this was an unexpected twist to an already weird and strange story. And a lot of people, there were some tweets that were saying bizarre, didn't have that on my bingo card. At least Ray Almeida ended up tweeting that out as well, saying that he just did not expect that to happen. And fans are also having trouble believing this was even a real report, as there was another Twitter user that was saying, quote, is this real? And many are reacting to this unexpected Wiseman mention. Like a lot of people were surprised. Like, really, you invested $1 million to try and develop James Wiseman? Like, this just seems so out of the blue and so completely random that it just doesn't sound real. And according to several other reports that I've looked at, this is real, and this definitely happened. Like, this is very, very real. Other fans have also poked fun at Golden State for their own failed development of the second overall pick, as another Twitter user tweeted out, guess Warriors weren't the only ones who got scammed by trying to develop Wiseman, which is it's kind of funny, but aside from that, this is a wild story that becomes even more interesting with the Wiseman name being mentioned. And I mean, really, everyone knows that it's like, you don't really get scammed all that much. You will sort of allow yourself to get scammed. At least that's my personal view, especially with like these two involved. I mean, if an offer, at least to me, if something sounds a little bit too good to be true and you're asking somebody that you don't know and that you've never met in person to do this for you for a certain amount of money, chances are that you're going to get scammed, especially if you are such a person that knows how to make money and a person that already has a lot of money in their bank account. You're going to be susceptible to a lot of scammers and a lot of people, especially being somebody who's famous. Like, you're going to be susceptible to a lot of scams. Now, I don't know what made Chandler Parsons think that this person would have been able to develop James Wiseman. Like, I'm very, very surprised that that's even like a possibility, because I mean, James Wiseman is just a bust in the NBA right now, and he's nowhere near the type of player that the Warriors expected him to be. But aside from that, this is a rule of thumb for everybody. Do not give money to random people. Do not give money to people that you don't know, and do not give money to people that you feel could develop James Wiseman, because no one can develop James Wiseman. No, I'm just kidding. But really, though, it seems like a very tough situation. Now, with Dwight, same thing sort of applies. Don't give money to somebody that you have no idea, like that you don't know in person. Don't give money to somebody unless you know they're going to invest it in this. And like, if you know the person, and if you there has to be something put into place. You cannot just give money to somebody and expect them to follow through with their word, especially in the way that the world is right now. You need to have a lot of things in writing. And on top of that, this sort of thing, this happened in 2021. Like, it took 3 years for this to come to light and for it to be proven that he ended up scamming. So it's like, there's a chance that you're not going to see that money anymore. And it's like, it's just, that's not it. Like, you can't afford to do that. And you cannot, it's just, I have no idea whether or not this was just, a flat out mistake, and somebody and if somebody just messed up, I have no idea. But this just, it's a crazy story, and I feel like this is something that shouldn't really happen, especially if you're an NBA player. I mean, there's so many, I'm sure that Dwight Howard knows a lot of coaches and a lot of other people, not Dwight Howard, excuse me. I'm sure that Parsons knows a lot of coaches and a lot of other players and like a lot of veterans that could possibly help Wiseman develop his game. He did not have to resort to $1 million and paying somebody to try and develop him. I don't know. That's just me. This whole situation is a little bit weird. And as for Dwight Howard, this could be seen as just a little bit of a mistake, because at the end of the day, he wanted to invest in a women's basketball franchise, and I don't know exactly what the offer was. I don't know if it was an offer that he just could not refuse or something like that. But again, it seems so random and it seems so out of the blue. But that's essentially the report that I have for all of you guys. Again, don't trust random people online. Don't give them your money. And don't do anything that involves money without having some sort of document in writing or having some sort of agreement in writing. Don't do it. You are putting yourself at a huge disadvantage, and you're putting yourself susceptible to scams. They're lucky that they have fantastic lawyers and that they were able to prove that he got scammed, but still, and both of them got scammed, excuse me, but still, this is a situation that can easily be avoided. Again, don't trust people that you meet online. Don't do it. That's all that I really have to say. So now we're going to go into the fifth segment, where I'm going to do a recap of every single basketball game that went down the other day and my thoughts on these games. And now, obviously, I did not watch the entirety of the games, mainly because there was football going on. And whenever there's football going on, I always watch my football, especially my New York Giants, who ended up winning the other day. So, ha! But aside from that, we're going to go ahead and go into the fifth segment, where I talk about all of the games that ended up, all the preseason games that happened. I'll talk to you about the score, I'll talk to you about the best players, talk to you about my thoughts, because I did watch some of the highlights. I just didn't watch the full game. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, I'm going to just recap all of the games that ended up happening yesterday. And there was 5 games, 5 NBA preseason games that ended up happening yesterday. So we're going to go over every single one of them. So we're going to start with New York, heck of a team. This was obviously Karl-Anthony Towns' debut game, and it's well regarded. Well, like, not really well regarded, but the main highlight from Karl-Anthony Towns in this matchup was hitting a ridiculously deep three-pointer, and that's really the reason why the Knicks ended up grabbing him. So, yay, it works, I guess you could say. But aside from that, the the Knicks as a whole and as a team, they played rather well. McBride ended the game with 22 points, 8 for 18, and Landry Shamet ended up going 6 for 11 from the field, ended with 16 points. Precious Achiuwa, forgive me if I mess up that last name, ended with 15 points, 6 for 9 from the field. Jalen Brunson, 5 for 11, 12 points. And again, now Karl-Anthony Towns, the only highlight of the game was that 1-3, and that was only one of his 2 shots that he ended up making that night. But aside from that, he ended the game with 10 points because of those free throws, and was also able to record 4 rebounds along with 2 steals. So, not to mention, there was also OG Anunoby, 4 points, Miles Bridges, 4 points, and Josh Hart ended the game with 0 points, good lord. But aside from that, this is just a preseason game, nothing really to worry about. And they ended up winning it. Now, the Charlotte Hornets, on the other hand, did LaMelo Ball, he made his return, and he ended the game with 18 points and was also able to record 7 assists, and he did all of this in just 19 minutes. And while shooting 6 for 14 from the field isn't really all that great, this is still a pretty solid performance coming from somebody who just returned from an injury. And Terrence Mann ended up playing really well as well. He shot 6 for 8 from the field with 15 points. Brandon Miller also ended the game with 12 points, but he shot 3 for 8 from the field, so not all that impressive. But still, this is, again, just a preseason game, and there were a lot of players that ended up coming off of the bench. The Hornets ended up shooting 44% from three-pointer as a team and 50% from the field as a team as well. Meanwhile, the Knicks shot 35% from three and 42% from the field, yet they were still able to come out with a win. And honestly, this is just a better performance. This was just not really a better performance from the Knicks, but rather a luckier performance from the Knicks, I guess you could say, because again, didn't really have all that many players shooting all that well. So I am going to go ahead and acknowledge Anthony in the chat. Who are your surprising teams that were rebuilding last year that you can see making the plan or being a top 6 seed this year? None, honestly. I don't think that there's any sort of rebuilding team that can really surprise me for this year. I think all of the top-heavy teams are going to continue to be the top-heavy teams, and they're going to continue to hold the playoff spots. And I don't think that there's any room for any sort of rebuilding team to even make the playoffs in either conference. And he has more in the chat. With the NBA in-season tournament, do you think eventually the NBA might just completely take out preseason? No, they will not. I do not think that is going to happen, because this is a time where you're not supposed to play your starters. You're supposed to play everybody else. And this is also the opportunity where everybody else can actually get a job in their rotation and create a career for themselves. And I don't think the NBA is going to take that away. And because, in the tournament, you can make the argument that the coaches are still going to play their starters. In the preseason, there's really no argument for playing your starters. I mean, yeah, sure, LeBron was playing in the matchup against the Lakers and the Suns, but for one, that was only 16 minutes, and Anthony Davis was playing as well, but that was also only 18 minutes. Meanwhile, there were so many other players that were getting more minutes than LeBron and Anthony Davis. That was never going to happen in the in-season tournament or in even a regular season game. That's just not going to happen. So this is the time where they put the players that don't have a name for themselves against other players that don't have a name for themselves, and they see if they can make a name for themselves. So I don't think the NBA is going to give that up. I genuinely do not think that that's going to happen. But that's just me. And, I mean, considering how selfish the NBA might be, maybe they do it. But towards the end, I don't think so. At the end of the day, I don't really think that that's going to happen. Now, they might reduce the amount of preseason games. That might happen, but I don't think so. I genuinely don't think they're going to change that format. Now, Manzano also says the perfect example of this was Duncan Robinson from Miami. If it wasn't for preseason, I don't think we would have been able to find them. Yes, that is true, but then again, Miami also has a very, very prolific history of being able to find diamonds in the rough, I guess you could say. And, Duncan Robinson was just no different. And, similar to how they're able to do that, other teams should also be able to do that and should also be able to easily do that as well. And that's exactly what preseason does. But anyways, the Celtics, they ended up matching up against the Nuggets again yesterday. This time they played in the Boston Celtics home court. The Celtics ended up destroying them. 130-104 was the final score. And Tatum, Brown, Derek White, they all played 20-plus minutes, and Jaylen Brown ended up being the leading scorer for the starters in this game, 21 points. And Jason Tatum ended with 17, and Derek White ended with 13. This team is way too overpowered. And Sam Hauser ended the game with 6 for 7 from the field. Derek White was 5 for 10. Jaylen Brown was 8 for 16. Tatum was 6 for 14. And again, this team is just incredibly overpowered. Now, the Denver Nuggets, again, they didn't really play much of their starters. Don't really expect them to do that. And as a result, I don't really expect their bench to be better than the Celtics and their depth. I genuinely just don't. It's really unfortunate. But aside from that, the next game to talk about is the Raptors against the Wizards. Wizards ended up getting destroyed. The Raptors ended up scoring 125 points compared to the Wizards' 98. And Jordan Poole is still Jordan Poole, still an overrated shot chucker in my opinion, and really just not a big fan of Jordan Poole and how he plays, and a lot of his fans, honestly, now that I think about it. And there's also, the Raptors, as at least the starting core for the Raptors, did not play well at all. But it's really like the bench that was able to, because they had numerous players score 10 points or more. And if you're able to have a bench that can score 10 points every single time, you are going to be a really good team, consistently a really good team, and you cannot be mad at that at all. Now, the biggest surprise, however, is the Pistons beating the Bucks. I know it's the preseason, but Detroit beating the Bucks 120-87, and the Bucks only scoring 8 points in the fourth quarter is absolutely absurd. That is ridiculous. Jordan Ivey ended the game with 22 points, and it's not really like the Pistons were playing all that good. It's more so the Bucks were just awful, really. Obviously, it makes sense. No Giannis Antetokounmpo in the game. Of course, they're going to be awful. And Damian Lillard, he did go 5 for 10. Maybe he's back in that, maybe he's back in shape this time. But still, this is sort of a lackluster performance coming in from Milwaukee. And a very, very, very bad shooting night from a lot of people. A.J. Johnson ended up going 1 for 8. Andre Jackson Jr. ended up going 1 for 6. Ryan Rollins ended up going 1 for 4. AJ Green ended up going 1 for 5. Stanley Umude ended up going 1 for 4. And so many other, 4 other players ended up going a combined, let me just do some math real quick, a combined 0 for 12, which is just bad, genuinely just awful. Actually, 0 for 11, excuse me. It's really, really bad. You cannot win a game when you have all of these players playing so inefficiently. And the team as a whole shot 39% from 3, which doesn't really seem all that bad. However, 34% from the field as a team is really, really bad. Meanwhile, the Pistons were able to shoot 46% from the field, which is honestly, the big difference maker in these two teams and the big stat. So that's all that I really have on these preseason games and just a recap of all of these games. And that's all that I have for this show. So thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, please remember to use the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. If you really want your comment or question to get recognized, that's gsmcpodcast.net, or you could use you could go ahead and use Super Chat, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or is going to be guaranteed to get featured on the show, so it doesn't really matter which you use or which you do. It's like either or. It's very, very it really helps the show, and it'll make it much more interactive between myself and you guys. And that's all that I really have to say on this final segment. Now, there are preseason games that are happening today, and there's one actually happening right now. The Pelicans are going up against the Orlando Magic, and the score is 7-11 in favor of the Pelicans. So just updating you guys on, if you guys are interested in the preseason, and if you want to see the preseason, there's a game going on right now. And there's going to be several games going on at around the same time that NFL football is going on, so maybe I'll tune into them, maybe I won't, but that's all that I really have today on this segment. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't